Hey everyone, DCB here again. So, this is going to be kind of an interesting and a little bit of a scary project for me. I'm going to be doing something I've never really done before, or I've done a little bit of, but I'm no expert at by any means. I'm going to be doing some large scale fiberglassing. I've always been kind of fascinated by this process, and I want to be better at it. And I think this is a good thing to add to my skill set. Years ago, I made this giant fiberglass cassette tape. Actually, I made two of them. And before that, I made this Quisp wall plaque. But for both of these, I made a silicone mold with a fiberglass backing, and that made it a lot easier to remove the cast out of, as the silicone is flexible and you can, just sort of peel it off the casting, and you don't have to worry about undercuts or, the piece kind of locking on. The problem with this method, though, is it can be pretty expensive, as silicone costs about $125 a gallon. Plus, it's not always the most durable and long lasting as what I'm going to attempt here. So, today I need to make some new bases for some McDonald statues I'm restoring. I have these two Ronald McDonalds here, and one of them doesn't have a base at all. And the other one, the base is so beyond repair. It's just missing huge chunks out of it, and there's just no way I can fix it. But I do have this Officer Big Mac statue that has a pretty decent base on it. And since set makers used the same base for him as they did for, Mayor McCheese and Ronald, they just drilled the footholes out a little differently for each of them. So I'm going to remove his base, clean it up, and make a mold of it. And then I'll be able to cast as many copies as I need for the Ronalds or any other baseless statues out there. I got all my supplies here, and I'm going to document the whole process. And even if it's a total failure, I'll show you everything. But I hope it's not, because I really need this to work. Two Ronalds and an Officer Big Mac are counting on me. So let's do this. The first thing I have to do is remove the base from the Officer Big Mac here. He's got two larger bolts and then a couple smaller ones that are all pretty rusted. So I'm going to use this breaker bar on my wrench to get them off. I think I just snapped the first one though, as it's just spinning around, but the other one seems to be coming off okay. I asked an expert here on the best way to remove these the rest of the way, and I think I'm going to take her suggestion and use my reciprocating saw with a metal cutting blade. It looks like the blade is going really slow here, but that's just the film rate on my camera. It's actually pretty fast. I was able to get all four bolts cut off, and the whole thing just comes apart with a little persuasion. There's a very large metal disc with a tube welded to it and holes cut into it that I'm going to have to get replicated for at least one of the Ronalds, since he doesn't have a base at all. It looks like the threading inside the foot peg has broken loose, so that's why the bolt was spinning. So now I'm going to have to figure out a way to reattach that bolt later on. Now I need to use the pressure washer to get all the dirt off. And then I'll bring it into my paint booth and give it a layer of primer, because the matte gray of the primer will help me better visualize the areas that need to be fixed up and attended to. Like, you can really see there's a bunch of hairline cracks in it that weren't visible before, as well as this chewed up bottom edge here and a few scuff marks here and there, as well as this area on top that I kind of messed up with my saw. But all of this should be pretty easy to fix up with some Bondo and glazing putty, so I'll work on that next. I back the holes and around the edge with duct tape and then fill all these troubled areas with Bondo. After that's secured, I'm going to sand the edges smooth with a metal rasp and a Dremel to get the more detailed spots. Then I give it a sanding with a 60 grit sandpaper sponge. I only put a little bit of Bondo in the holes at first so the tape wouldn't sag, but after it's secured and solid, I'll come back and add a little more Bondo to completely fill them. This pneumatic air belt sander makes quick and easy work of the sanding process. After all the sanding is done, I'll do another layer of filler primer just to see where I'm at. There's still some areas that need my attention, so I'm going to use glazing putty because I can get more detail that way. After the putty dries, I'll wet sand it and wash it off. And then do another layer of primer and another layer of glazing putty, and then more sanding, washing, painting, putty. I repeat this process a good 7 or 8 times until I get everything as smooth as I can. Now that I have all the dings and scratches fixed up, I'm going to give it a layer of glossy black spray paint just to give it a nice smooth surface. After that's dry, I'm going to do a layer of release wax applied with this applicator pad, making sure to get every nook and cranny. Once the wax haze is over, I'll take this microcloth and buff it out to a nice shine. I'll repeat this process several times over and over again until masking tape no longer sticks to it. And at that point, it's ready to start the molding process. Now I'm going to hot glue the base to my table so it doesn't move around during the molding process. I just go around the edge here, kind of filling in the gap between the base and the table. And then I'll take this clay extruder and crank out a bead of oil-based non-drying plasticine clay and do a little more fine tuning on the edge, making sure to really fill in those gaps. I use a wooden clay sculpting tool here to really get in there and define the clay and create a nice tapered edge. Once I have it filled in all the way, I'll take some rubbing alcohol and clean off the base and really smooth out the clay. This step is crucially important so that the gel coat and the fiberglass don't sneak underneath the base and create a mechanical lock into the mold where you won't be able to remove it without a lot of effort and possibly damaging the mold. Next, I'm going to top coat it with some PVA, which stands for polyvinyl alcohol. This is a water soluble liquid that will dry to a thin sheet of almost like a thin plastic that'll act as a secondary mold release barrier. You can apply this with a foam brush, which is totally acceptable, but I prefer to use a spray gun for a more even surface to give it a nice thin even coat all around. And then I'll let that sit for 45 minutes to cure. And then come back and do a second coat and let that cure for 45 minutes. And then the third and final coat, I'm going to let that cure for an hour or so just to off gas and everything before I move on to the next step. Now on to the gel coat. This is the step I've been most nervous about, but it should be fine. I think I'm going to start out with 8 ounces at first, and then to that I'll need to add 1.5 MEKP catalyst.
The answer is 0.12.
Then I'll convert that number to milliliters because that's what my droppers are measured in.
The answer is 3.55 milliliters.
And I'll just add that with the dropper and mix thoroughly. I bought this nifty spray gun that's specifically made just for gel coat. The nice thing about it is that it uses a disposable paper cup system for its hopper. You just put this metal cap onto it and attach it to the trigger with a spring. But it's very drippy when you hold it downward, so I'll have to get used to that. Now I just pull the trigger and spray away. Eight ounces didn't quite cover everything, so I'm going to try another 8. This time I'll make sure to keep the gun with the nozzle upright so it doesn't drip. So you want the gel coat to be pretty thick. I have this gauge here and it says I'm at 18 mils so far, but I wanted to get up to about 25-ish, so I'll try another 8 ounces. I might as well just use the rest and finish off this bottle. After this fourth layer, I'm right where I want to be at 25 mil, so that's good. The quart bottle was the perfect amount. Cleanup is a breeze with these paper cups. You just pop off the top and throw it away and give the rest of it a wipe down with some acetone. So I think this is going to work. I'll check back on it in a few hours. After just 2 hours, the gel coat has pretty much set up. There's a slight tackiness to it, but none of it's coming off on my finger. The set time will vary depending on how much MEKP you use and the temperature that you're working in. It's 69 degrees here where I am today, and I used 1.5% of the catalyst. If you're working in a colder temperature, you could use a little bit more MEKP, and vice versa. If you're in a warmer environment, you can use less of it. Now it's on to the fiberglass layers. To capture initial details of the piece, the first layer I'm going to use is this almost tissue-like 30-gram glass. It's super thin and I can just easily cut it with a scissors. And then for every layer after that, I'm going to use this 0.75 ounce glass. It's a little thicker, but it also easily cuts with the scissors. I'll put the tissue layer down first and then cut some lines every few inches here so it lays better over the piece. I'm just using regular polyester resin here with no wax in it. That's important. If there was wax in it, the layers would not bond to each other. More on that later. I'll start out with 250 milliliters of the resin and add 1.5% of the MEKP, same as the gel coat, and mix it up really good. And I'll pour it right into the center here, and then I'm going to manipulate it outwards, removing as much of the air bubbles as I can, pulling from the center out to the edge. I have this little roller tool that helps a lot in the flat areas. You don't want to press too hard with it though, just enough to get the glass wet and pull the bubbles outward. And for the more detailed areas, I'm going to just use a stabbing motion with the brush and really get into all the little grooves and stuff. After this layer is fully saturated, then I'll put the 0.75 on. I accidentally sliced it a bit when I was cutting it out of the packaging, but that's okay. Same as the last time, I'll cut some lines every so often so that it lays flatter, and then I'll just use my roller and my brush. Same method, just slowly working it. Overall, these first two layers took about 2.5 hours to do. It's pretty easy, but it's just a bit of tedious work. Like I said, I'm a total novice here, but I think I'll get better and faster as I go on. I'll let these first two layers cure overnight and then on to two more layers in the morning. I want to be patient and give the resin enough time to cure properly. I came in this morning to find this. I'm not sure what's going on, but it needs to stop right now. But the base is looking good. The resin is all cured and I don't see any air pockets, so I'm ready to do the third layer. I'm going to do 500 milliliters of resin this time since I'm a little more confident in the process. I'll brush the entire base to get it all wet so that the fiberglass has something to stick to and it can start absorbing the resin. This also helps keep it in place, which is handy for when I go around and cut the flaps. So I did everything basically the same as last time, so there was really no need to film it. I added a fourth layer after this. These two layers took me about an hour and 45 minutes this time, whereas yesterday it took 2.5 hours. So I'm starting to get a little more efficient and faster at it. Hopefully, the next 5 layers will be a breeze. So now on to layers 5 and 6. Same as before, just using the 0.75 chop strand. I find that 500 milliliters of resin is enough to work with on each batch. Any more and it feels like it would start to set up before I could get it all on. I could really feel that with this batch. It's a little warmer in my shop today and the resin was starting to get a little jelly towards the end. Then on to layers 7 and 8. These will be the final layers that I use the chop strand on. As I progress through the layers, it gets a lot easier as the detail has been smoothed out over time and I don't have to push as hard to get the glass down into the grooves. And now for the final layer, I'm going to use this 4-ounce cloth fiberglass. It just has a nicer texture to it. Sometimes with the chop strand, you'll get a couple stray fibers sticking out here and there that can poke you, but this just gives it a more uniform, smooth surface. I'm just going to do one layer of this, and then since this is the final layer, I'm going to add some wax to the resin. It's a 1 ounce per quart ratio, so since I'm doing 500 milliliters, that would be about 15.6 milliliters of the wax. The purpose of this additive is as the resin cures, the wax will rise to the surface and give it a less tacky feel to it. And that's why you want to use it on the last layer. You can't use it on the layers before that though, because it would create a surface that the next layer wouldn't stick to properly, unless you want to sand the surface before laying the next layer down and all that. But who wants to do that? So the same as before, I'm going to pre-soak the surface and then just lay the cloth on. It drapes a lot better, so I don't have to do so many cuts, but it is a little more difficult to get the air pockets out. When you push one area, another area just wants to lift up, and it's not nearly as conforming to the bumpy surfaces that the chop strand is. So that's why you don't want to use it on a more detailed layers because it could bridge over the gaps, which could create weak areas in the mold. This is just sort of a beauty layer, so it's not 100% crucial that all the bubbles are worked out. So here's a quick little recap. First, I gave the piece 3 or more layers of release wax, buffing in between applications, doing this enough times until masking tape no longer sticks to it. And then I sprayed 3 layers of PVA and let that sit for an hour. Next came the tooling gel coat, which I sprayed to a thickness of around 25 mils and let that cure overnight. Then each day I did 2 layers of fiberglass and resin. Day 1 was the thin 30-gram tissue fiberglass, followed by a layer of the 0.75 ounce chop strand. Day 2, 3, and 4 were 2 layers each day of the 0.75 ounce, and then finished off with the final layer of 4-ounce weave cloth with the wax added to the resin. This is just a guide and your mileage may vary, but I think it's a pretty solid formula. Next step is removing the item from the mold. I hope this works. Yikes. So the surface came out really nice and tack-free because of the wax I added to the last layer. The first thing I gotta do is get this off the table because remember I hot glued it to it. So I'm just running various blades around it. This Japanese style saw worked pretty good to get deep under there and cut it all loose. The clay trim that I put around the edge earlier did a really good job at keeping the gel coat away from seeping underneath and creating a mechanical lock, so that's good. Now I'll take my grinder with a cutoff wheel and just trim off the excess here, giving myself a couple inches of flange around it. And then this orbital sander to round off any of the sharp edges. I have these plastic wedges that'll tap in between the part and the mold to help break it from the surface. I'm just going to go around tapping them and prying it loose. It's being a struggle to remove though, so I'm going to try and squirt some water in between the two and hopefully that'll dissolve the PVA and maybe loosen it up a little bit. As I continued around the wedges, this happened. I had a cut on my nose from that for days after, so I guess be sure to wear nose protection. I don't know. This is really tricky mold, and I think it's just the odd bowl shape of it, and there's just a little bit too much detail in the leaves that it's grabbing and locking on. I'm going to try giving it some light tapping with a rubber mallet, and maybe that'll help break the top surface. And then I thought maybe if I hung it from some chains, I could tap around the edge here, but that was just a horrible idea and a disaster. So unfortunately, I'm kind of out of ideas here. I'm just gonna have to cut the mold in half and try to salvage the base. I'm gonna start with my Dremel and a metal cutoff wheel and just kind of lightly run it along the halfway line, trying not to go too deep and cutting the original piece. And then I'll finish the cut with my Dremel Multimax with a flat cutting blade. After I finished the cut, I took a crowbar to pry up the edges, and wouldn't you know it, it just pops right off super easily. So, from that, I conclude that a two-part mold would absolutely be the way I have to go with this piece. But unfortunately, that was a pretty costly mistake, and I'm going to have to discard this mold because I'll never be able to get it back together and make castings, as there'd be like this huge seam between the molded parts, and that would be difficult to sand out on each casting. So it's just better to make a two-part mold, I think. So that's what I'll have to do, but at least now I can show you the two-part mold process. But this one-part mold is totally fine for, I guess, more flat, maybe less detailed items or something. So it's still a useful lesson to be taught, and I think it's perfectly fine looking mold, even though it wasn't the right method for this particular part. The original piece did get some dings and damage here and there, so like last time, I'm going to prime it to get a better view of what I'm dealing with here. I cut into it a little bit where I was cutting the mold in half, and then the edge got a little rough from all the vice grips and all that. But again, just a little Bondo and glazing putty, and I should get everything back to square one with a nice clean buck that I could make a new mold off of. But this time it'll be good.
I just want to take a moment here and acknowledge the amazing properties of fiberglass. It's kind of remarkable that you can have this extremely brittle polyester and this easily terrible, rippable fiber that individually have little to no strength, but when you combine them together, it creates this insanely durable, nearly indestructible material that's extremely lightweight and it's 100% weather resistant. And you can form it into these endless, unique shapes that you just couldn't do with any other material and still have these attributes. I just find that to be the neatest thing ever. And that's all. Thanks, fiberglass.
You're welcome.
Now I got the base back to square one after I filled in all the dings and cuts with Bondo and then coated it in a layer of glossy black spray paint. So now I'm back to the beginning, back to putting on several layers of wax again. I made this divider wall with a plastic signboard, and I'll use plasticina clay, which is a non-drying oil-based clay, to fill in the gap between the sign and the base, and then this sculpting tool to smooth that out, and then afterwards rubbing alcohol to kind of smooth that and refine that some more. I'm going to make some clay wedges here with a 45-degree angle on the edges and stick them to the board. It was suggested to me by my fiberglass supplier to use these half spheres. Both of these will act as registration keys later on. It'll make more sense when I do the second half. Again, 3 layers of PVA, waiting 45 minutes between each layer, and then after about an hour or so, I can spray on the gel coat. I used 16 ounces on this side, which is half of the quart bottle. After the gel coat cures, I add the tissue layer of fiberglass first, and then the layer of 0.75 ounce glass, just like last time. It's a little tricky getting around these spheres, but I eventually got a method down, and it went fairly quickly. I did a final layer, like last time, using the cloth and adding wax to the resin to give it the smoother, tack-free surface once it's cured. It's pretty warm in here today, and my last layer actually set up in just a few hours, so now I can take off the divider bar. This came off quite easily, but Like I said, because it's so warm today, the clay is actually soft and a little difficult to get out. I'll just have to work at it. The domes are a whole other issue to remove, though. My supplier said to use wooden half domes, and if I did that, I could have probably just put a screw in the back of them and easily pulled them out. But all I had were these hollow plastic ones on hand, so I just used those. They look great, but they're quite a bear to remove. I chipped away at them for quite a while, but they eventually came out. I'm supposed to now wax this flange several times like I did the main piece, but I hate doing that, so instead I'm just brushing on a mixture of Vaseline and mineral spirits. This will create a barrier between this flange and the other half. Then, just as before, I will give the whole thing 3 coats of PVA with my spray gun, waiting approximately 45 minutes between coats, and then the layer of gel coat, and then do my multiple days of laying up layers and layers of glass, just like last time, 2 layers each day. I need to get some bolts, washers, and wing nuts to bolt the two halves together. I live about 5 blocks from my local Ace, and I bike up there probably an average of 1.7 times a day. I think these 5/16 inch and a quarter length ones with threading all the way up the shaft should be just fine. I'm going to make sure each one fits together though, because I've had many a time when I get home and discover that the wrong item was in the wrong drawer. Oh, and I probably should buy some Nutter Butters, just in case. Can you guess which house is mine? I'll give you a clue. It's this one. I'll use a drill bit for wood, as it has this nice pointy tip on the end that'll keep the bit from walking. Next, I'll use my grinder again and cut off the excess. With this flange, the mold will not lay flat, so I'm going to cut some risers out of cardboard and then glue them on with some E6000. I'm not sure this is the best option, but it's what I had on hand, so we'll see. I can always change it later. Now comes the final moment of truth. Is this 2-part mold going to work? First thing I need to do is pry it off the table, and for that I'll use my wedges, and that came off pretty easily. I'm going to take my grinder again and cut off the excess glass around the trim and then sand the edges smooth with the orbital sander. And now I can start pounding the wedges in. It seems to be coming apart pretty easily. I mean, it's a little bit of a struggle, but I can feel it starting to give. I just got to slowly work my way around it. And then this. And just like that, pops right off the piece, like magic. And with I hate to say this word, but a satisfying pop. Look at this beautiful mold. I never thought I'd see the day. Second side is just the same. Once it gets loose, it just pops right off. Reassembly is easy with these registration keys, and the bolts hold it nice and tightly together. There's a little bit of a seam, but there's a way to address that when I make the casting. I'm just ecstatic that this worked after all this. I did notice a few small holes and blemishes in the gel coat. I think this is because I didn't have quite enough gel coat to do my 25 mil thickness this time. So I did as thick as I could with what I had. These spots should be pretty easy to repair with a little bit of epoxy putty. I'll mix the two parts up and then smash it into the holes and then spray isopropyl alcohol over that so I can smooth it out perfectly into the rest of the mold. So this will be fine. So I know this video is getting a little long and I'm really excited to show you all what I've done so far with it. The whole thing has been a pretty lengthy operation. Um, I first took the base off the Officer Big Mac like 54 days ago, but there's a lot of processing of it and the multiple layers of glass, each taking a day or so to cure, plus all the other projects I'm working on in the background. I just want to get this video up, so I think I'm going to stop right now, and it's also going to be a few more days until I can get some more resin and glass. So when I do, I promise I'll film the whole actual casting and finishing of the base. That'll be part 2. I think I should have that video up in a couple weeks or so. It won't be as information intense as this one, since most of the process and the materials are pretty much the same as the molding, just in reverse, sort of. Anyway, thank you for making it this far. I know it's a long one, but hopefully you learned something. I know I did. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you soon.
Darn, that's the end.
Thanks everyone for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe to this channel and follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Dustin Cropsboy. Also check out our TeePublic page for t-shirts you can buy to help support this channel, or just go to the website dcbvarietyhour.com for all the links.